The conference room smelled like leather and ambition. Raymond stood near the back wall, gripping a worn notebook against his chest, watching Silicon Valley's most powerful venture capitalists settle into chairs that probably cost more than his monthly rent. At 73, he didn't belong here. His khaki pants had a small stain near the pocket. His button-down shirt was pressed but fraying at the collar. The shoes, $20 from a discount store, squeaked softly when he shifted his weight. He had driven 11 hours to reach this building. Slept in his car last night in the parking garage because the cheapest motel still wanted $80 he couldn't spare. His daughter needed surgery. The kind insurance companies found creative ways not to cover. He had $3,000 in savings and needed $30,000 more. This idea, this one chance, was all he had left. The room buzzed with conversations he couldn't follow. Cryptocurrency, disruption metrics, Series B valuations. Everyone here spoke a language of wealth he'd never learned. They wore watches that caught the light. Carrot phones he'd only seen in advertisements. A woman near the front laughed at something, tilting her head back, and Raymond noticed her earrings, small diamonds that probably represented 6 months of his Social Security checks. Then the door opened and the room changed. Jonathan Pierce walked in like gravity bent around him. 6'2". Salt and pepper hairstyle with a casual precision that cost $200 and was meant to look effortless. His suit was charcoal gray and fit perfectly because it had been made for his body specifically. He moved to the head of the table and didn't sit. Just stood there, one hand resting on the back of the chair, surveying the room like a general assessing troops. People straightened in their seats. The conversations died mid-sentence. Someone coughed and it sounded too loud in the sudden silence. Jonathan Pierce, the man who'd turned 3 failed startups into billion-dollar acquisitions, who'd been on magazine covers and TED Talk stages, who'd once told a national television audience that he could smell a good idea in 30 seconds and had built an empire proving it. His venture capital firm had launched 40 companies in the last decade. 38 had succeeded. The 2 failures still made him more money than Raymond had seen in his lifetime. "We have 12 pitches today," Jonathan said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "You each get 5 minutes. Impress me or don't waste my time." Raymond's hands were sweating against the notebook. He'd practiced his pitch for 6 weeks, timed it to 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He'd researched Jonathan Pierce's investment history, studied what worked, what failed, what patterns emerged. He'd done everything right except for the one thing that mattered most in this room. He looked like someone who didn't belong. The pitches started. A 26-year-old in designer sneakers talked about artificial intelligence and content creation. Got 7 minutes and a follow-up meeting. A woman with an MBA from Stanford presented data visualization software. Jonathan asked 3 questions and wrote something on his tablet. A man with a British accent described blockchain solutions for supply chain management. Got nodded at thoughtfully. Raymond waited. His number was 8. The morning stretched and compressed simultaneously. Time felt wrong in this room. When his name was finally called, he stood too quickly. The chair scraped. People glanced back at him, and he saw the exact moment their assessments happened. Old, poor, confused. Someone's grandfather who'd wandered into the wrong building. He walked to the front. His shoes squeaked twice. Someone near the middle row smirked. Jonathan Pierce looked at him with the expression of a man trying to place an unexpected item. Curiosity mixed with impatience. "You're Raymond?" "Yes, sir." His voice came out steady. He practiced that too. "I have an idea I'd like to share." "You have 5 minutes." Jonathan glanced at his watch. Platinum, Raymond noticed, catching the light like liquid metal. Raymond opened his notebook. The pages were filled with his handwriting. Diagrams drawn carefully with a ruler. Calculations checked and rechecked. 6 months of work distilled into these sheets of paper. "I've developed a water filtration system that—" "We don't do hardware," Jonathan interrupted. His tone wasn't cruel, just factual, dismissive in the way powerful people dismiss things beneath their consideration. "This is a software fund. Did you read the application requirements?" "I did, sir. But this system has a software component that—" "Mr." Jonathan looked down at his tablet. "Mr. Hayes, we appreciate you coming in. but we're not the right fit for your project. Thank you for your time. The room went quiet in a different way now. The kind of silence that comes before laughter or after an accident. Raymond stood there, notebook open, feeling every eye on him. So, he said quietly, if I could just explain the application potential. I'm sure it's very interesting. Jonathan's voice had cooled. Polite but final. But we're running behind schedule. Thank you. Raymond didn't move. Couldn't. He thought of his daughter. The hospital bills stacked on his kitchen counter. The surgery scheduled for 6 weeks from now that he had no way to pay for. The 11-hour drive back to a house that felt emptier every day since his wife died. Please, he said, and hated how the words sounded. Small. Desperate. Just 2 minutes. I drove. Mr. Hayes. Jonathan's patience was evaporating. I'm going to have to ask you to. Can I share one idea? Raymond's voice cracked slightly. Just one. Then I'll leave. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. What city? What country? I'm curious who's paying attention to what happens next, because this moment, this one question, is about to change everything in that room. Jonathan Pierce sighed, glanced at his assistant, who was already standing, ready to escort Raymond out. The smoke from the middle row had spread to 3 other faces. Someone near the back was typing on their phone, already dismissing this as a waste of their morning. Then something shifted in Jonathan's expression. Maybe boredom. Maybe curiosity about his own capacity for tolerance. Maybe just the performer's instinct that every good story needs a moment of unexpected grace. One idea, he said slowly. 30 seconds. Starting now. Raymond's heart hammered. 30 seconds. He'd prepared for 5 minutes and now had 30 seconds to distill 6 months of work into a few sentences that might save his daughter's life. His mind went blank for one terrible moment. Then muscle memory took over. Municipal water systems lose 40% efficiency to mineral buildup, he said quickly. My system uses a crystallization process that captures those minerals and converts them into sellable industrial compounds. The software tracks the conversion rates in real time and adjusts the filtration to maximize both water purity and mineral yield. Cities save money on water treatment and make money selling what they usually throw away. The system pays for itself in 18 months and generates revenue after that. He stopped, looked at Jonathan, waited. The room was quiet again. Different this time. Someone had stopped typing on their phone. Jonathan Pierce was staring at him with an expression Raymond couldn't read. Where did you say you were from? I didn't, sir. Kansas. Small town outside Topeka. And what's your background? Engineering. No, sir. I was a high school chemistry teacher for 41 years. Something flickered across Jonathan's face. Interest. Or maybe just surprise that a chemistry teacher had walked into his office with a pitch about water filtration economics. Why are you here? Jonathan asked. The honest answer was too raw, too desperate. But Raymond had nothing left to lose and 30 seconds had turned into a conversation, which meant something had shifted, even if he didn't understand what. My daughter needs surgery, he said simply. Insurance won't cover it. I need $30,000 and I have $3,000 saved. This idea, this system, it works. I've tested it. Built a prototype in my garage. I just need someone to believe it's worth investing in. The room had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks or transforms. Jonathan Pierce studied him for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, but with something that looked almost like amusement. You want me to invest in your garage prototype because your daughter needs surgery? No, sir, Raymond said, and his voice was steadier now. Clearer. I want you to invest because the idea will make you millions. My daughter needing surgery is just why I'm desperate enough to drive 11 hours and sleep in my car to tell you about it. Someone in the room inhaled sharply. You didn't talk to Jonathan Pierce like that. You didn't correct him or challenge his framing or suggest he'd misunderstood anything. Jonathan's smile widened. Cold. Calculating. And Raymond realized with sinking certainty that he'd just made a terrible mistake. Tell you what, Jonathan said, and his voice carried across the room like an announcement. I'll make you a deal. You say your system works, that cities would save money and generate revenue, that it pays for itself in 18 months. He paused, and Raymond felt the trap closing but couldn't see how to avoid it. Prove it, Jonathan continued. Not with your notebook, not with your garage prototype. Prove it right here, right now, in a way that everyone in this room can understand. If you can do that, if you can make me believe this idea is worth 1 penny of my money, I'll write you a check for $100,000. On the spot. The room erupted in whispers. $100,000. More than Raymond needed. More than he dared hope for. Someone near the front laughed nervously. And if I can't? Raymond heard himself ask. Jonathan's smile was a blade now. Then you leave this building and you never contact my fame again. You go back to Kansas and you figure out some other way to save your daughter. And everyone here gets a reminder about why we don't waste time on people who don't belong in rooms like this. The cruelty was casual, performative. Jonathan wasn't angry. He was entertained. This was a show for the other investors. A demonstration of power. A lesson about hierarchy and who got to dream and who got sent home. Raymond should have walked away. Should have thanked Jonathan for his time and left with whatever dignity remained. But he thought of his daughter, the surgery date, the bills, the empty house waiting for him. And he thought of something else. Something he hadn't planned to reveal. Something he kept private for reasons that suddenly seemed less important than they had this morning. All right, he said quietly. I'll prove it. Jonathan Pierce's eyebrows rose. He clearly hadn't expected Raymond to accept. You'll prove it, right now? In this conference room? Yes, sir. This should be entertaining. Jonathan gestured broadly to the room. Everyone, please give Mr. Hayes your complete attention. Let's see what a chemistry teacher from Kansas thinks counts as proof. Raymond set his notebook on the table, opened it to a page filled with chemical formulas. Then he looked up at Jonathan Pierce and said something that made the smile disappear from the billionaire's face. Before I prove the system works, Raymond said slowly, I should probably mention that I know your father. The room went silent. Jonathan Pierce's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something cold and dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Yes, sir, you do. Raymond's voice was gentle. Sad, even. Your father was Thomas Pierce. He died 6 years ago. And before he died, he spent 3 years in a cave facility in Kansas. I visited him every week. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan Pierce stood absolutely motionless, his hands still resting on the back of his chair, but his knuckles had gone white. The other investors looked between Raymond and Jonathan like spectators at a tennis match who'd just realized they were watching something far more dangerous than a game. Get out, Jonathan said quietly. But Raymond didn't move. He kept his eyes on Jonathan's face, watching the careful control that powerful men learn to maintain even when the ground shifts beneath them. Your father talked about you, Raymond continued, his voice still gentle. Every week, he'd tell me stories about when you were young. Before the money, before the success. He was proud of you, but he was also. I said, get out. Jonathan's voice was louder now, the veneer cracking. Whatever con you're running, whatever research you did too. He told me about the summer you were 12, Raymond interrupted. When he took you to the municipal water treatment plant where he worked, showed you how the filtration systems operated. You asked him why they couldn't capture the minerals instead of just washing them away. He said you'd always been smart like that, seeing value where other people saw waste. The room had gone completely silent. Someone's phone buzzed and they scrambled to silence it. Jonathan Pierce was staring at Raymond with an expression that had moved past anger into something more complicated. Confusion. Recognition. Fear. That's not possible, Jonathan said slowly. He never told anyone that story. He told me lots of stories, sir. Every Thursday afternoon for 3 years. He had good days and bad days. Toward the end, more bad than good. But on the good days, he remembered everything. And he talked. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn at the edges from being carried. He set it on the conference table. Jonathan stared at it like it might explode. It was a picture of a man in his 70s, sitting in a wheelchair in a sunny room, thin and frail, but smiling. And standing next to him, hand resting on his shoulder, was Raymond. Younger in the photo, but recognizably the same man. He didn't have many visitors, Raymond said quietly. You were building your empire. I understand. Time is money, especially for people like you. But he was lonely, and I was there anyway, visiting my wife in the same facility. She had Alzheimer's. Took her 5 years to forget who I was. Someone in the room made a small sound. Sympathy or discomfort. Jonathan's face had gone carefully blank. The mask of control back in place, but not quite fitting right anymore. What do you want? Jonathan asked. I already told you. I want you to believe my idea is worth investing in. But now you know where the idea came from. Your father and I talked about water systems. He told me about that day when you were 12. About your question. And I went home and I thought, what if that 12-year-old was right? What if we could capture the value instead of washing it away? Raymond opened his notebook again. This time no one was smirking. The investors were leaning forward, and Raymond realized with surprise that he had their complete attention now. Not because of his pitch, because of the story. Because Jonathan Pierce's father had been real and lonely and human, and that changed everything about the man standing at the head of the table. I spent 2 years developing the crystallization process, Raymond said. Used the equipment at the high school. Ran tests on weekends. Your father helped me refine the calculations. He still remembered the engineering, the chemistry. Even when he couldn't remember what he'd eaten for breakfast, he could walk me through mineral extraction rates. He turned the notebook to show a page filled with equations. Not just Raymond's handwriting anymore. A second hand. Shakier. Older. But clear enough to read. That's his writing, Jonathan said. Not a question. A statement. His voice had gone hoarse. Yes, sir. He made me promise something before he died. Made me swear I'd finish the system. Said it was the last thing he wanted to do that mattered. Something that might help people. He knew you'd become successful. Knew you'd made more money than he'd ever dreamed about. He was proud of that. But he also said. Raymond stopped. This was the part that might go too far. The part that might shatter whatever strange détente had formed in this room. But he'd already committed. Already thrown every card he had onto the table. He said he wished you'd stayed curious like you were at 12. Before you learned to measure everything in dollars. He said the boy who asked about capturing minerals was smarter than the man who only knows how to capture market share. The silence that followed was absolute. Someone near the back was crying quietly. A man with wire-rimmed glasses had his hand over his mouth. Jonathan Pierce stood frozen, staring at the notebook, at his father's handwriting, at the physical evidence that the past was never as buried as you wanted to believe. Then he did something that stunned everyone in the room. He sat down, just pulled out his chair and lowered himself into it like his legs had stopped working properly. Put his head in his hands. And when he looked up again, his eyes were red. Show me the system, he said quietly. So Raymond showed them. Not with his garage prototype. Not with some PowerPoint presentation. He walked them through the chemistry using the whiteboard on the wall. Drew diagrams that were beautiful in their simplicity. Explained crystallization rates and mineral market values and installation costs and efficiency curves. He talked about pilot programs and scalability and regulatory approval processes. He answered questions from investors who were now asking because they genuinely wanted to understand, not because they wanted to expose him as a fraud. And every few minutes, he'd reference something Thomas Pierce had said. Some insight or correction or encouragement. The dead man became present in the room through Raymond's words, and Jonathan Pierce sat perfectly still, listening to his father speak through a chemistry teacher from Kansas who'd been kind to a lonely old man. An hour passed. Then another. Jonathan's assistant came to the door twice to remind him about other meetings. He waved her away both times. Finally, Raymond finished. Set down the marker. Turned to face the room. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands were trembling. But he'd done it. Proven the system worked. Made them understand not just the economics, but the vision. The 12-year-old's question answered by decades of combined experience and loneliness and determination. The pilot program would cost $800,000, Raymond said. Target a mid-sized city. Kansas City, maybe, or Albuquerque. Run it for 18 months. If the numbers work, and they will, you could scale to 50 cities in 5 years. Revenue projections are in my notebook. Conservative estimates put it at $40 million annually within a decade. He closed the notebook, looked directly at Jonathan Pierce. Your father believed in this. I'm asking you to believe in it too. Not for me, not even for my daughter, though God knows I need the help, but because it's a good idea. The kind of idea that matters, that helps people and makes money and doesn't require anyone to lose for someone else to win. Jonathan Pierce stood slowly, walked around the table to where Raymond stood. They were the same height, both older than most people in the room, both carrying weight that had nothing to do with age. My father, Jonathan said quietly, died alone. I was in Tokyo closing a deal. Got the call 3 hours after he passed. I'd been meaning to visit. Kept saying I'd make time. But there was always another meeting, another opportunity, another reason why tomorrow would be better than today. He picked up the photograph, studied it, put it back down on the table with a care that suggested it might be the most valuable thing in the room. You gave him something I didn't, Jonathan continued. Time. Attention. Someone who gave a damn whether he was lonely or scared or just wanted to talk about water systems with someone who'd actually listen. You want me to invest in your idea? I'll do better than that. He turned to his assistant, who'd appeared in the doorway again. Cancel the rest of today's schedule. Get our legal team on the phone. And someone bring me the acquisition papers. Raymond's heart was pounding so hard he thought he might pass out. Acquisition papers. Jonathan turned back to him, and for the first time since Raymond had walked into this room, the billionaire was smiling. Really smiling. Not the cruel performance from earlier. Something genuine. I'm not investing in your idea, Mr. Hayes. I'm buying it outright. $3 million for the patent and the system, plus consulting fees of $15,000 monthly for the next 5 years while we develop and scale it. Plus, he paused. What's your daughter's name? Claire, Raymond whispered. Plus a $50,000 grant to the Claire Hayes Medical Fund. No strings attached. The money's yours tomorrow. Get her the surgery. Get her healthy. Then come work for me and let's build what my father believed in. The room erupted. Applause. Shouts. Someone was crying openly now. Raymond couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what he'd just heard. $3 million. His daughter saved. His idea real. His 2 years of work validated by the one person whose opinion somehow mattered most. I don't understand, he managed to say. My father was right, Jonathan said simply. I stopped being curious. Started measuring everything in money. You walked into this room today and reminded me that some things matter more than market share. This system, this idea, it's good. Genuinely good. The kind of thing that helps people and makes money and doesn't require anyone to lose. Those are rare. Worth paying for. Worth building. He extended his hand. Raymond took it. The handshake was firm. Professional. But also something more. An acknowledgement of debt paid. Of circles closing. Of fathers and sons and the strange ways grace finds us when we've stopped expecting it. Before you leave today, let me say something, Jonathan announced to the room. And I want all of you to hear this. Remember this. If you learned anything today, learn this. He gestured around at the investors, the assistants, everyone who'd witnessed this transformation. We're in the business of finding what's valuable. But sometimes the most valuable things walk in looking like they don't belong. Sometimes genius sounds like desperation. Sometimes the best investment you'll ever make is the one that costs you nothing but time and attention and basic human decency. He looked back at Raymond. My father knew that. Spent his whole life knowing it. I forgot. Thank you for the reminder. Now, if this story means something to you, if it made you feel something or think something or believe something might be possible that you didn't believe an hour ago, then do me a favor. Like this video. Leave a comment about what struck you most. Share it with someone who needs to hear that being counted out doesn't mean you're out of the game. Subscribe to this channel because we tell stories about people who refuse to disappear just because the world wants them to. And check the description box below because there are more stories like this. True stories about people who walked through doors they weren't supposed to open and changed everything on the other side. The legal team arrived within 30 minutes. Papers were drawn up. Numbers confirmed. Raymond signed documents with hands that shook so badly Jonathan had to steady the pen twice. When it was done, When the money was guaranteed and the system was officially property of Pierce Ventures, Jonathan walked Raymond to the elevator. "One more thing," Jonathan said as the doors opened. "Every Thursday afternoon, for as long as you're in California, I'm blocking off my schedule. You're going to tell me every story my father told you. Every word you remember. Every conversation. Every good day and bad day. I want to know what I missed. What I gave up for deals that don't matter nearly as much as I thought they did." Raymond nodded. Couldn't speak. Could barely see through the tears. "And Mr. Hayes." Jonathan's voice stopped him as he stepped into the elevator. "Tell Claire that her grandfather, because that's what my father became to you, I think. Tell her he saved her life. Not me. Him. Through you. Make sure she knows that." The elevator doors closed. Raymond rode down 4 to 7 floors in silence, watching the numbers decrease, thinking about the 11-hour drive home that would feel completely different now. Thinking about his daughter, about Thomas Pierce, about the strange mathematics of grace and timing, and old men who stayed curious even when the world told them their questions didn't matter anymore. When he reached the parking garage, he sat in his car for 20 minutes. Just sat there, processing. Then he called Claire. "Dad." Her voice was worried. She'd been waiting by the phone. "How did it go?" "Baby girl," Raymond said, and his voice broke on the words, "Pack a bag. You're having surgery next week. And after you are healed, we're moving to California. I got a job. A real one. The kind that comes with health insurance and a salary and a reason to believe tomorrow might be better than today." She was crying. He was crying. And somewhere, Raymond thought, maybe Thomas Pierce was smiling. The kind of smile that comes from seeing something good happen not because you forced it or bought it or demanded it, but because you planted seeds and trusted that someone would water them after you were gone. 3 months later, the pilot program launched in Albuquerque. Raymond stood in a municipal water treatment facility that smelled like chlorine and concrete, watching technicians install equipment he'd designed in his garage. The crystallization chambers gleamed under fluorescent lights. Monitoring software tracked mineral capture rates on screens that updated every 60 seconds. The facility manager, a woman named Patricia who'd been skeptical until she saw the numbers, kept walking around the installation like it might disappear if she stopped watching. "This is really going to work?" she asked for the 3rd time that morning. Raymond smiled. He'd learned to be patient with skepticism, had enough of his own to recognize it in others. Give it 6 weeks. The system needs time to optimize. But yes, it's going to work. And it did. The data started coming in by the end of the first month. Water purity increased by 12%. Mineral extraction exceeded projected rates by 8%. The captured compounds, primarily calcium carbonate and magnesium sulfate, tested at commercial-grade quality. Within 3 months, Albuquerque had sold its first batch to industrial buyers for $48,000. The system had already paid for 30% of its installation costs. Jonathan Pierce flew in to see it operating, brought a documentary crew and a reporter from a national business magazine, stood next to Raymond in front of the crystallization chambers and talked about innovation and social responsibility and the future of infrastructure investment. But afterward, when the cameras left, he pulled Raymond aside. "Thursday," he said quietly. "Don't forget. My office at 3. They'd been meeting every Thursday since Raymond moved to California. Not in the conference room where everything had changed, but in Jonathan's private office. A smaller space with comfortable chairs and photographs on the walls. Pictures of Jonathan's family, his children, and one new addition, the photograph of Thomas Pierce in his wheelchair, Raymond's hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling. The Thursday meetings had become something neither man had expected. Not business meetings. Not therapy exactly. Something else. Jonathan would ask questions and Raymond would answer. What Thomas said about growing up poor. About building his career as an engineer when that meant something different than it did now. About marriage and fatherhood and the particular loneliness of aging in a country that worships youth. About his son who'd become more successful than Thomas had ever dreamed but who'd also become unreachable somewhere along the way. "He never blamed you," Raymond said during one of those Thursdays. "I want you to understand that. He was proud, but he also missed you. Those aren't contradictory feelings. People can hold both at once." Jonathan had nodded, written something in a journal he'd started keeping, then asked another question, and another, slowly reconstructing his father through someone else's memories. But the pilot program was just the beginning. Word spread. Kansas City called, then Denver, then Milwaukee. Cities facing budget crises and aging infrastructure saw the data from Albuquerque and wanted their own installations. Pierce Ventures found itself in a business Jonathan had never expected to dominate: municipal water systems. Not glamorous, not the kind of thing that made magazine covers, but profitable, sustainable, actually helpful. Claire recovered from her surgery. The doctors said the outcome was better than they'd hoped. She started physical therapy, regained full mobility, went back to teaching kindergarten, visited her father in California every other month, met Jonathan once, briefly, and thanked him. He'd looked uncomfortable with the gratitude, changed the subject, asked about her students instead. But Raymond noticed he'd made a donation to her school afterward. New art supplies, books for the classroom library, a grant that arrived anonymously but wasn't hard to trace. The second installation went into Kansas City, then the third in Denver. By the end of the first year, 12 cities had signed contracts. By the end of the second year, 37. The revenue projections Raymond had outlined in that conference room turned out to be conservative. Actual numbers ran 20% higher. Municipal contracts expanded to include maintenance services, software updates, optimization consulting. Pierce Ventures launched a subsidiary company, Thomas Pierce Water Solutions, to handle the growing demand. Raymond insisted on the name. Jonathan tried to argue it should be Hayes Pierce or something more balanced. But Raymond was firm. This was Thomas's dream, his question at 12 years old, his belief that value existed where others saw waste. The company would carry his name and his vision, and Jonathan eventually stopped arguing. The expansion meant Raymond traveled constantly. Albuquerque to Kansas City to Denver to Milwaukee to Portland to Nashville, meeting with city officials and facility managers and environmental engineers, explaining the system over and over, troubleshooting problems, training technicians. He was 75 now. The travel exhausted him, but he couldn't imagine stopping. Somewhere in the second year, Jonathan started traveling with him. Not to every city, but to enough that it became a pattern. The billionaire and the chemistry teacher, an odd pair in municipal water treatment facilities across the country. They'd inspect installations together, review data, meet with city officials, then find a local diner and sit over coffee while Jonathan asked more questions about his father. Did he talk about my mother? Jonathan asked once, in a diner outside Milwaukee. Sometimes, Raymond said carefully. He missed her. They'd been married 43 years when she passed. He said she was the one who taught you to ask questions, that she'd sit with you for hours when you were little, answering every why and how like you were a scientist instead of a kid. Jonathan had gone quiet after that, stayed at his coffee, finally said, I don't remember that. Isn't that terrible? I don't remember her doing that. You were young when she died. 6, right? 5. Jonathan's voice was rough. I remember the funeral. Remember people in black clothes. But I don't remember her sitting with me. Don't remember the questions. Your father remembered for you, Raymond said gently. That's what parents do. Hold the memories until their children are ready to carry them. The work expanded beyond what Raymond had imagined. Environmental groups started citing the Thomas Pierce system as a model for sustainable infrastructure. The EPA requested a presentation. Congressional staffers reached out about potential federal funding for broader implementation. A university in Michigan wanted to license the technology for research. Everything was moving so fast that Raymond sometimes felt like he was watching his life happen to someone else. But the Thursday meetings continued, anchored everything, made the chaos feel purposeful. Jonathan would clear his schedule no matter what deal was pending or what crisis needed attention. 3 o'clock every Thursday. Raymond would arrive at the office and they'd sit in the comfortable chairs and talk about Thomas Pierce. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. During one of those meetings, about 18 months after the conference room encounter, Jonathan said something that surprised Raymond. I'm seeing a therapist. Raymond looked up from the coffee he'd been drinking. That's good. She says I'm working through complicated grief. Mourning someone I lost twice. Once when he died and once before that when I chose to stop making time for him. Jonathan smiled without humor. She says it's common. Sons and fathers. Success and guilt. The way we sacrifice relationships for achievements and then wonder why the achievements feel hollow. Does it help? The therapy? I don't know yet. But she also said something interesting. She said these Thursday meetings might be the most important thing I do all week. That reconstructing my father through your memories is allowing me to build a relationship with him I didn't have when he was alive. A second chance I don't deserve but am getting anyway. Raymond set down his coffee. We all deserve second chances, Jonathan. That's not a luxury. It's just being human. Is it though? Jonathan's voice was quiet, uncertain in a way that probably no one else ever heard. I had time, had money, had every resource, could have hired the best care, visited every week, done anything I wanted, but I didn't. I chose not to. That's not tragedy. That's not circumstances beyond my control. That's just me being selfish and short-sighted and too damn proud to admit I was scared. Scared of what? Of him dying. Of watching him disappear piece by piece. Of sitting in that facility smelling antiseptic and watching a man who used to be brilliant forget how to feed himself. I told myself I was too busy, but really I was just a coward. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the city hummed. Cars and voices and construction noise. Life continuing indifferent to private confessions. Your father never called you a coward, Raymond said finally. He called you human. Said people protect themselves from pain in whatever ways they can manage. Said he understood why you stayed away even though it hurt him. Said he hoped you'd forgive yourself someday because he'd already forgiven you. Jonathan's face crumpled. He cried then. Really cried. The kind of crying that comes from deep inside where you store the things you can't afford to feel during business hours. Raymond didn't say anything. Just sat there, present. The way he'd been present for Thomas. The way someone needs to be present when grief finally finds its way to the surface. When Jonathan could speak again, he said, "Show me how to do what you do." What do you mean? Be there. Actually there. Not just physically present, but really paying attention. You did it for my father. For your wife. For your daughter. You know how to show up for people in a way I never learned. Teach me. So Raymond tried. Not through lectures or advice. Through example. He brought Jonathan to visit Claire. Let him see how they talked. How Raymond asked questions and actually listened to the answers. How he noticed small things. A new picture on her wall. A different route she'd taken to work. A book she mentioned wanting to read. And followed up later. How he made people feel like they mattered not through grand gestures but through sustained attention. They visited the K facility where Thomas had lived. Met with administrators about improving end-of-life care. Jonathan wrote a check, a large one, but Raymond made him do more. Made him sit with residents who had no visitors. Made him listen to their stories. Made him understand that money could solve many problems but presence solved different ones. Slowly, over months, Jonathan changed. Not completely, not magically, but noticeably. He called his children more often. Attended school events he used to delegate to his assistant. Started a foundation focused on elder care and family support services. None of it erased his regret about his father, but it channeled the regret into something productive. Something Thomas might have recognized and approved of. The Thomas Pierce Water Solutions Company continued expanding. 50 cities. Then 70. Then installations in 3 other countries. The system worked everywhere. Proved scalable. Started generating the kind of revenue that made analysts pay attention. Pierce Ventures received acquisition offers, large ones, but Jonathan refused them all. This isn't for sale, he told Raymond after turning down the $3 billion offer. This is the one thing I'm doing that matters more than money. The one piece of my portfolio that exists because it should exist, not just because it can be profitable. During one of their Thursday meetings, nearly 2 years after everything started, Raymond brought something new. A small wooden box, worn smooth with age. He set it on the coffee table between their chairs. Thomas asked me to give this to you, Raymond said, after he died. But he said to wait until the right time. Until you were ready to receive it properly. Jonathan stayed at the box like it might contain something dangerous. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Inside was a watch. Not platinum, not expensive, just a simple timepiece with a leather band and a scratched crystal. Thomas's watch, the one he'd worn every day for 40 years. And underneath it, a letter, handwritten, dated 3 weeks before Thomas died, addressed to Jonathan. Jonathan's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. Raymond looked away, giving him privacy, but he could hear Jonathan's breathing change, could hear the quiet sounds of reading something that cuts too deep for public consumption. When Jonathan finally looked up, his eyes were streaming. "He says he's proud of me, says he knows I'll do great things, says he hopes I'll remember that the best things aren't measured in money but in moments, in time given freely, in attention paid to people who can't pay you back." He held up the watch. "He says this watch measured every hour he spent with me when I was young. Every story he told, every question he answered, every moment he chose to be present instead of somewhere else. He says it's the most valuable thing he owns because it counted the only currency that actually matters." Raymond nodded slowly. "He wanted you to have it. Wanted you to remember that time is the one resource you can't buy more of. Can only spend it. The question is whether you spend it on things that matter or things that merely seem important." Jonathan put the watch on. It fit perfectly. He sat there staring at it. This simple timepiece that represented everything he'd lost and everything he might still recover. "Thank you," he said finally, "for being there. For him. For me. For holding these memories until I was ready to carry them." "That's what friends do," Raymond said. "And that's what we are now, I think. Friends." Jonathan smiled through his tears. "Yeah, I think we are." Outside, the city continued. Inside, 2 men sat in silence, connected by a dead man's love and the strange grace of second chances neither of them had earned but both were determined to honor. The third year brought changes nobody predicted. The Thomas Pierce water solution system caught the attention of international development agencies working in regions where clean water access remained a critical challenge. Raymond found himself on conference calls with officials from Kenya, Bangladesh, and Peru. The economics that worked in American cities translated differently in developing nations, but the core principle remained: capture value instead of washing it away. Jonathan committed $30 million to international expansion, hired engineers fluent in 5 languages, established partnerships with local governments and non-governmental organizations. The installations in emerging markets operated differently, smaller scale, more adaptable to limited infrastructure, focused on health outcomes as much as revenue generation. But they worked. In Kenya, a village of 8,000 people got clean water for the first time in a generation. In Bangladesh, a coastal town vulnerable to saltwater contamination found a system that filtered and converted simultaneously. In Peru, an indigenous community gained both clean water and an income source from selling the captured minerals. Raymond traveled to these installations. At 7 to 7, the flights exhausted him more than they used to. Claire worried constantly, called twice a week to make sure he was resting properly. But he couldn't stay home, couldn't let others implement what he needed to verify personally. Jonathan often traveled with him, and together they'd stand in villages watching systems activate, seeing faces transform when clean water flowed for the first time. During one trip to Kenya, standing in a village square while children played near the new water station, Jonathan said something Raymond had been waiting to hear. "This is what my father wanted his life to mean," Jonathan said quietly. "Not just engineering, not just solving problems, but actually helping people in ways they'd remember, ways that would matter after he was gone." "He'd be proud of what you've built," Raymond said. "What we built," Jonathan corrected. "I'm just the money. You're the vision. Together we're doing something neither of us could do alone." The Thursday meetings continued but evolved. Sometimes they'd use the time to review international reports. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, both exhausted from travel, just being present with each other. Once, Jonathan brought his children, 2 teenagers who'd been largely absent from his life until recently. They sat awkwardly at first, unsure why their father wanted them to meet this old man. But Raymond told them stories about their grandfather. About the young engineer who'd been curious and kind. About the old man who'd stayed sharp even as his body failed. About the father who'd been proud even in his disappointment. The teenagers listened, asked questions, and when they left, Jonathan's daughter hugged Raymond, just wrapped her arms around this stranger who'd known her grandfather and said, "Thank you for giving him back to us." The foundation Jonathan established in his father's name grew beyond elder care. Started funding education programs focused on teaching children to ask questions. Established grants for teachers in underfunded schools. Created mentorship programs pairing retired professionals with young people from difficult circumstances. Every initiative traced back to something Thomas Pierce had believed or said or represented. The foundation became a living memorial, more meaningful than any statue or building could be. Raymond's health started declining in the fourth year. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of age and wear. His doctor recommended he reduce travel, stop working such long hours, consider retirement for real this time. Raymond listened politely and ignored every suggestion. He'd retired once, back in Kansas. That was enough. This work mattered too much to abandon just because his body was getting tired. But Jonathan noticed. Started insisting Raymond take assistance on trips. Hired a full-time health aide who traveled everywhere with him. Arranged for first-class flights and hotel rooms with medical equipment. Made sure Raymond had support without making it feel like supervision. They never discussed it directly. Just adjusted around the reality that Raymond wasn't going to stop but needed more help to continue. The Thursday meetings became shorter. Sometimes just 30 minutes. Sometimes Raymond would fall asleep in the comfortable chair and Jonathan would sit there working quietly on his laptop, not wanting to wake him, just being present the way Raymond had taught him to be present for others. During one of those meetings, Raymond woke to find Jonathan watching him with an expression of deep concern. "I'm fine," Raymond said automatically. "You're not fine. You're exhausted. You're pushing too hard. I'm doing what matters. That's different than fine." Jonathan closed his laptop. "Claire called me yesterday. She's worried about you. Says you won't slow down. Won't listen to your doctors. Won't admit that maybe you've done enough. Have I?" Raymond's voice was sharper than intended. "Have I done enough? There are still 50 cities waiting for installations. 10 countries that need clean water systems. 100 projects that won't happen if I stop now. They'll happen. We have teams. Engineers. Project managers. The work will continue. But not the same way. Not with the same care. Not with someone who remembers why it matters." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed the direction of everything. "Teach me. Really teach me. Not just the engineering or the business. Teach me how to care the way you care. How to see people the way you see them. How to make work matter beyond profit margins. I'm serious. I want to learn. Before it's too late." So Raymond taught him, not through speeches or lessons but through inclusion. Brought Jonathan into every decision. Made him talk to the engineers in Kenya. Made him listen to facility managers in Albuquerque explain their concerns. Made him sit in planning meetings and really hear what people needed instead of just what they said they wanted. Taught him the difference between solving problems and serving people. Between building systems and building communities. It was exhausting work. Harder than the engineering. Harder than the travel. Teaching someone to care required constant attention and correction and patience. But Jonathan proved surprisingly capable. He'd ask questions Raymond recognized from their Thursday conversations. Questions about intention and impact and legacy. Questions that showed he was thinking beyond the next quarter's earnings. The international work continued expanding. 23 countries now. 78 installations. Clean water for 2 million people. Captured minerals generating revenue that funded more installations. The cycle sustained itself. Grew organically. Became exactly what Raymond had envisioned in his garage 5 years ago. If you're still watching this, if you've made it this far into this story, then you're someone who understands that transformation doesn't happen in moments. It happens in the sustained effort between moments. The daily choices to show up, pay attention, keep caring when it would be easier not to. If that resonates with you, then do something for me right now. Like this video. Leave a comment about a time someone showed up for you when they didn't have to. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their work matters, even when it feels invisible. Subscribe to this channel because we tell stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things through simple persistence. And check the description box below for more stories about people who refuse to let the world make them small. The fifth year brought recognition, awards from engineering societies and environmental organizations, a profile in a major business magazine, speaking invitations from universities and conferences. Raymond refused most of them, accepted a few when Jonathan insisted it was important for the work's credibility. But he remained uncomfortable with attention, preferred to stay in the background, let the system speak for themselves. Jonathan handled the public-facing work, gave the speeches, accepted the awards on behalf of Thomas Pierce Water Solutions, talked about his father and Raymond and the partnership between vision and resources. He'd become surprisingly good at it, learned to tell stories that made people care, learned to make engineering sound human, learned the difference between selling an idea and sharing a mission. During one award ceremony at a major university, Jonathan gave a speech that Raymond listened to from the audience. Watch this billionaire who'd once been cruel and dismissive talk about humility and service and the importance of remembering that wealth means nothing without purpose. Watched him credit his father's memory and Raymond's patience for teaching him what actually mattered. Watched the audience respond with standing ovation. Afterward, in a quiet corridor away from the reception, Jonathan found Raymond sitting on a bench. "You okay?" Jonathan asked. "Just tired. Good speech, though. Your father would have been proud." Jonathan sat next to him. "He'd have been proud of you. Not me. You're the one who made all this happen. I just wrote checks. You did more than that. You learned, changed, became someone who could carry this work forward after I'm gone. Don't talk like that. I'm 7 to 9, Jonathan. Eventually we have to talk like that." They sat in silence. The reception noise filtered through the walls. Laughter and conversation and the sounds of people celebrating work they didn't fully understand but recognized as important. "I need to tell you something," Jonathan said finally. "Something I should have said years ago." Raymond waited. "When you walked into that conference room, when you stood there looking desperate and out of place and willing to humiliate yourself for your daughter, I saw weakness. Saw someone I could crush for entertainment. Saw an opportunity to remind everyone in that room why I was powerful and you weren't." He paused. "I'm ashamed of that person. Ashamed it took your courage and my father's memory to make me see how hollow I'd become." "You were lost," Raymond said gently. "People get lost. What matters is finding your way back. You gave me a map. Drew it carefully over 5 years of Thursday meetings and water treatment facilities and conversations I didn't know I needed. You saved my life as surely as I helped save your daughter's. Maybe more so, because she needed surgery, but I needed transformation, and you gave me that without ever making me feel judged or inadequate or beyond redemption." Raymond reached over and gripped Jonathan's shoulder. The same gesture he'd made with Thomas Pierce in that photograph. The simple human contact that says, "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone. You redeemed yourself," Raymond said. "That's what matters. Not what you were, what you chose to become." They sat there together, two old men in an empty corridor, connected by a journey neither had planned but both had needed. The work would continue. The systems would expand. More cities and countries and communities would benefit. But in that moment, the work didn't matter as much as the relationship. The simple fact that they'd found each other across an impossible divide and built something real from the wreckage of regret and the architecture of grace. Raymond collapsed in Jakarta. The doctors said it was exhaustion combined with an undiagnosed heart condition that had been quietly failing for months. Jonathan flew 18 hours to reach the hospital. Found Raymond in a bed surrounded by monitoring equipment, looking small and gray and frighteningly fragile. "You should have told me," Jonathan said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Would have just worried you." Raymond's voice was weak but steady. Work needed to get done. "The work can wait. You can't." But they both knew that wasn't true. Raymond was 80 now, had pushed far beyond what anyone expected. The doctors said he needed to return to the United States immediately, needed rest and treatment, and to accept that his body had limits his determination couldn't override. They flew back together. Jonathan arranged everything. Medical transport, specialists, a room in the best cardiac facility in California. Claire came immediately, took a leave from teaching, barely left her father's side. The three of them, Raymond, Claire, and Jonathan, formed an odd family in that hospital room, connected by crisis and history and love that transcended simple categories. Raymond survived but was changed. The doctors said no more international travel, no more 16-hour days, no more pretending he could operate like someone half his age. Raymond agreed to all of it, which scared Claire more than the heart attack had. Her father never agreed to limitations, never accepted defeat. The compliance itself suggested something had shifted, but the work continued. Under Jonathan's leadership and Raymond's remote guidance, the Thomas Pierce Water Solutions Company kept expanding. 130 installations now, 43 countries, clean water for 8 million people. The captured minerals funded new projects. The cycle perpetuated itself. Everything they'd built had achieved sustainability. The Thursday meetings moved to Raymond's apartment. Claire would make coffee. They'd sit in the small living room surrounded by photographs and notebooks and memories of 5 years that had changed all their lives. Sometimes they'd discuss business. Sometimes they'd just talk. About Thomas. About regret and redemption. About what it means to spend your life on something that matters. During one of those meetings, 6 months after Jakarta, Raymond pulled out a folder. Old and worn. Filled with documents he'd been keeping since the beginning. "I want you to have this," he told Jonathan. "Everything about the original system. My notes. Your father's corrections. The whole history of how the idea developed. Not for the company. For you. So you remember where it came from." Jonathan took the folder with hands that shook slightly. Opened it carefully. Saw his father's handwriting mixed with Raymond's. Saw equations and diagrams and small notes in the margins. Tried this approach. Didn't work. Thomas suggested. Ran tests 17 times. Thomas was right about the crystallization rate. "Is all through this," Jonathan said quietly. "Every page. He was part of it even when I didn't know." "He was part of everything," Raymond said. "That's what I've been trying to show you. The people we love don't disappear just because they die. They persist in what we build and how we treat others and the questions we learn to ask. Your father is alive in every water system we install. Every community that gets clean water. Every child who drinks without getting sick. He's there. Part of the work. Part of you." Jonathan sat with the folder for a long time. Claire brought more coffee. Sat quietly on the couch. She'd become close with Jonathan over the years. Saw in him something of the uncle she'd never had. The way he cared for her father. The way he'd changed from the man who'd almost thrown them out of his conference room into someone capable of genuine love and sustained attention. "I need to tell you both something," Jonathan said finally. "I've been working on something. A surprise. For Raymond. For this whole story." He pulled out his phone. Showed them a website. The Thomas Pierce Foundation's new initiative, the Second Chances Scholarship Program. Full-ride scholarships for people over 65 who wanted to pursue new careers or finish interrupted educations. People who'd spent their lives working but never got the opportunity to chase their dreams. People like Raymond, who'd been a chemistry teacher but could have been so much more if circumstances had been different. "We're funding 100 scholarships the first year," Jonathan explained. 500 within 3 years. We're partnering with universities across the country. No age limits. No prerequisites except determination and a dream you've been carrying too long without support. Raymond stayed at the screen. At his own story transformed into opportunity for others. "Why?" "Because you taught me that it's never too late. That transformation can happen at any age. That the most valuable investments are often in people everyone else has written off. You were 73 when you walked into my conference room. Everyone there thought you were a waste of time. They were all wrong. How many other people are out there right now, carrying dreams they think are too late to chase? I want to find them. Give them a chance you gave yourself." Claire was crying. Raymond was crying. Jonathan's voice was unsteady as he continued. "The first scholarship recipient is already selected. She's 68. Spent her life as a nurse. Always wanted to be a doctor but couldn't afford medical school. Now she's starting at Stanford in the fall. Full ride. Housing included. living stipend to cover expenses. She's going to be 72 when she graduates. She's going to be a doctor. Because you walked into my office 5 years ago and proved that age is just a number and determination is the only currency that matters. They sat together in Raymond's small apartment, looking at the website, reading about the scholarship program, understanding that the work had evolved beyond water systems into something even more fundamental. Belief in human potential, faith in second chances, commitment to the idea that nobody should be counted out just because they've lived too many years or made too many mistakes or look like they don't belong. The months passed. Raymond's health stabilized but didn't improve. He accepted his limitations more gracefully than expected, spent his days consulting remotely, reviewing plans, advising on installations, but mostly just living, reading, spending time with Claire, enjoying the Thursday meetings without feeling like he needed to prove anything anymore. The Thomas Pierce Water Solutions Company continued thriving, became one of the most successful social enterprises in the world, profitable enough to sustain itself, impactful enough to matter, a model for how business could serve humanity without sacrificing either viability or values. Jonathan transformed fully. Not overnight, not magically, but comprehensively. His relationships with his children deepened. His work gained meaning. His wealth became a tool for good instead of just a scorecard. People who'd known him in the conference room days wouldn't recognize the man he'd become. Someone who listened, who cared, who understood that success without purpose was just noise. One Thursday, almost exactly 6 years after their first meeting, Raymond didn't wake up. Died peacefully in his sleep. Heart just stopped. Clay found him in the morning and called Jonathan immediately. They sat together in Raymond's apartment, surrounded by his things, feeling the absence of someone who'd become essential to their lives. The funeral was small. Raymond had requested that. No spectacle. No speeches from people who hadn't known him. Just family and close friends. Jonathan spoke briefly. Talked about transformation and second chances and the particular grace of old men who refuse to disappear just because the world wants them to. Talked about his father and Raymond and the strange miracle of two lonely people finding each other across impossible divides. Claire spoke too, about her father's determination, his kindness, the way he'd saved her life not just through the surgery money but through teaching her that being counted out doesn't mean you're out of the game. The way he'd loved her mother even as Alzheimer's stole her away. The way he'd kept going when easier paths would have been to give up. They buried Raymond next to his wife. Same cemetery where Thomas Pierce was buried. 3 graves now connected by a story nobody could have predicted. Jonathan arranged for a simple stone. Just Raymond's name and dates. And underneath, he taught us to ask better questions. The work continued. Had to. That's what Raymond would have wanted. The installations expanded. The scholarship program launched. The foundation grew. Everything he'd started or inspired or touched continued without him. That's how you know someone's life mattered. Not because they are mourned when they die, but because what they built keeps building after they're gone. Jonathan kept the Thursday time slot blocked on his calendar. Didn't schedule meetings during that hour. Just sat in his office. Sometimes reviewing reports from Thomas Pierce Water Solutions. Sometimes reading from the folder Raymond had given him. Sometimes just sitting in silence, remembering conversations and lessons and the particular weight of transformation. Claire stayed in California. Took a job teaching at a school the foundation had partnered with. Saw her father's influence everywhere. In the water fountains that used the Pierce system. In the scholarship recipients who visited campus. In the culture Jonathan had built that valued people over profit and purpose over prestige. 5 years after Raymond's death, the Thomas Pierce Water Solutions Company completed its 1,000th installation. Clean water for 50 million people. Captured minerals funding continuous expansion. The system had achieved everything Raymond envisioned and more. Self-sustaining. Scalable. Making money while making life better. Jonathan stood at that 1,000th installation. A village in rural India. Watched children play near the new water station. Watched families fill containers with clean water. Watched hope transform into reality through engineering and economics and the sustained effort of people who believed things could be better. He thought about the conference room 6 years ago. about the old man who'd walked in looking desperate, about the cruelty he'd almost committed, about the grace that had stopped him, about his father's memory and Raymond's patience and the unlikely partnership that had changed everything. Sometimes, Jonathan thought, the most important investments are the ones you almost miss. The opportunities that look wrong until you're paying enough attention to see them clearly. The people who don't belong until suddenly they're the only ones who matter. The ideas that seem impossible until someone proves they were inevitable all along. He pulled out his phone, took a picture of the children playing near the water station, sent it to Claire with a message. Your father would be proud. We're doing exactly what he hoped we would. Her response came quickly. He's still doing it. Through all of us. That's what love means. It doesn't end when people die. It just transforms into what we choose to build. Jonathan stood there for a while longer, watching the village, feeling the weight of responsibility and privilege and possibility, understanding finally what Raymond had been teaching him all along. That success isn't measured in dollars or deals or magazine covers. It's measured in lives changed, in systems built that serve instead of extract, in relationships honored even after death, in questions asked by 12-year-old boys that get answered by 73-year-old men who refuse to accept that it's too late to matter. The sun was setting over the village, golden light catching the water as it flowed clean and clear from the new station. Children laughing, families gathering, hope visible in ways that no balance sheet could capture but every human heart could recognize. Jonathan thought about his father, about Raymond, about all the people who'd shaped him into someone capable of seeing beauty in water systems and redemption in second chances and purpose in the sustained effort to make things better. Thank you, he said quietly to the sunset in the village and the memory of two old men who'd taught him everything that mattered. Thank you for the reminder. Thank you for the chance. Thank you for refusing to let me stay who I was. The work would continue, tomorrow and next year and for decades to come. The installations would multiply. The scholarships would expand. The foundation would grow. Everything they'd built would keep building. That's the nature of good ideas executed with love. They don't end. They just keep transforming. Keep creating ripples that spread farther than anyone imagined. And somewhere, Jonathan believed, Raymond was watching, sitting with Thomas Pierce, both of them smiling at what they'd started, what they'd made possible, what their combined stubbornness and vision and willingness to see value where others saw only waste had created. The village children kept playing. The water kept flowing. The sun kept setting. And the wake, the great work of making life better for people who needed it most, continued forward into a future that looked brighter than the past had any right to expect. Before you go, if this story touched something in you, if it made you think differently about second chances or wasted potential or the ways we dismiss people who might change our lives, then do one last thing for me. Like this video if you haven't already. Leave a comment about the lesson you're taking away from Raymond's story. Share it with someone who's been counted out or written off or told they're too old or too late or too different to matter. Subscribe to this channel because we believe in telling stories about real transformation, not fairy tales. And check the description box below because there are dozens more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who refuse to accept the limits the world tried to impose. Stories about grace and second chances and the stubborn persistence of hope. That's what Raymond taught us. That's what Thomas Pierce believed. That's what Jonathan learned. And that's what we're passing forward to anyone willing to listen. It's never too late. You're never too old. Your dream is never too small. And the people who look like they don't belong might be exactly the ones who change everything. Keep asking questions. Keep building systems. Keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today if we're willing to do the work. That's the lesson. That's the legacy. That's what matters when everything else falls away.